My name is Jennifer Prugh, and my home is in San Jose, California. Yoga found me first in 1969. I was 7 years old, and it was the summer of love. And my friend lived across the street, and he had a mother who did yoga. And she sat me down on the kitchen floor. She was wearing a black leotard, and we did Upavishta Konasana, legs wide, folded forward. And I thought she was beautiful and fascinating. And I began to watch Lilias Folan on her program. And then I have two little sisters, and I would make them do shoulder stand and headstand against the couch growing up. That was my first experience teaching. I had yoga in junior high school because I lived in Marin County in the 70s. And I suppose we were fortunate to have yoga, although at the time it seemed very embarrassing to move like that. And then it wasn't again until 1989 when I took a class with Sherry Baptiste in San Anselmo. And it was Sherry's class that had me come home. I sat down on the floor, and I was quiet in my mind for the first time and as long as I could remember. And I knew that night that I would do yoga for the rest of my life. I was in graduate school when I had that experience with Sherry, and I was studying the nature of human consciousness at that time. That was actually my master's degree, coupled with art. And I was a professional artist when I left graduate school, and ironically began illustrating for Yoga Journal before I'd really dug in deep with yoga. And shortly thereafter, I was hired by an engineering college in Sunnyvale in Silicon Valley to teach the humanities to engineering students. And I worked there and became an associate professor. I worked there for 8 years. And during that time, I began taking more and more yoga because I found aspects of that vocation, like faculty meetings, challenging. And I felt as though the body needed to be part of the learning experience. And I fell in love with it so much that I was going in the morning, I was going in the evening, and my teacher at that time, Kent Bond, said, you should consider teaching. And I said, no. That will destroy my relationship to the practice if I start to teach. I love being a student. But one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I had my first class, and I was teaching I began teaching really in 1999. I have had, especially in the last few years, a strong interest in yoga scholarship, and especially in regards to understanding where this practice came from. And probably the reason that I have become so curious is that, like many of us, I did many teacher trainings. And I did an Iyengar teacher training, an Ashtanga teacher training, a Vinyasa teacher training, and several prominent teachers. And of course, the longer you're in this, the more you realize that, well, one, the asana and the yoga can be distinct. And the asana, like I said in my videos, is a shape. And inside that shape, for me, that's where the yoga happens. And I became really curious about, could I find a source? Could I find some route back to some source? And that became extremely interesting to me. So because I had been in higher education for 8 years, I'm already have a proclivity towards study. And I began to read. And what I've found in all of that is I've met some amazing people who are scholars. And the ones that I have come to respect the most are those that are deeply practiced in their bodies again, ironically. They know it from the inside out, and they've done the deep work of learning several languages, of direct translation, so that it's something that's not just back to the head, but it's something that's the head and the body. I became very interested in the source to the point where I first went back to India in 1999 to do some consulting work, but then didn't return until about 2008. And at that time, I went on a month-long retreat throughout many cities in India and stayed in an ashram and did many of the things that yoga practitioners do. And it wasn't long after that that I decided I would go back. And not only would I go back, but I would lead a group back. And so I began doing Path of the Buddha retreats, where I would take people wherever the Buddha was, from when he was born to where he was enlightened to when he died. And I did several of those trips and then led a teacher training in Dharamsala. And essentially one thing led to another. And I realized 2 years ago, I went to the Kumbh Mela, which is a huge event of as many as 100 million people, the most gathered in one place. It was in Allahabad, where the three rivers meet. I had taken so many photographs up and down the Ganges that I decided that I would do a whole photography book on the Ganges River, not knowing what I was getting myself into. And it turned out that I had to go to the source of the Ganges, or what I believed was the source of the Ganges, which was Gangotri. And this was a year and a half ago, just before monsoon season. And I made it up to Ganga, the goddess's abode, and a huge storm. The monsoon came early that year, and we ended up trapped in a vehicle with thousands of other people, actually. The long and the short of it is that I had a dream not to go to the next place I was supposed to go, which was Shiva's abode. And I decided to change my route, and I didn't go there, and instead I went to Vishnu's abode, Badrinath. And on the way down from Badrinath, we ended up in a series of landslides that lasted for 3 days. And when we finally got out, I discovered by reading the newspaper on the plane that 10,000 people had been wiped out because the lake had given way above Shivaratri. So Shivaratri was taken out. That was an enormous experience for me. And when I was in Gangotri, when I was up there, I thought I was going to go see this very little river, like a little rivulet of a river. It's a huge river that the source was well beyond that point. And in fact, this summer I'll be going to Tibet, where it is believed that the source is the lake that sits underneath Mount Kailash. And I'll be going there. And all along, I've taken many trips to India. I've sat with people who are being cremated in Manikarnika Ghat. I've photographed people who have survived polio, who live on little platforms with wheels in Haridwar. I've seen a lot, and I know enough we hear this, that the journey lies within. Well, it certainly does. It lies within. And I think that's one of the beauties of our yoga practice, is that it can take us so deeply into ourselves. And we come to the practice for a variety of reasons. I know over the years that I've been practicing, I've had many reasons to practice. And at this time in my life, my practice has become a much, I'd say, deeper spiritual pursuit. While I love the physical practice, I am mostly enjoying the meditation. So my love for Source is my love for understanding viscerally in my body, kinesthetically, what it means to get to be in this body in the short time that we're here. I think one of the most essential elements that makes this practice so powerful is that over a period of time, one forfeits trying to figure out how to make things go the way they want in their life. And we all know that feeling of being in Shavasana and almost as if we're allowing grace to descend upon us. There's just this incredible release. And many of us for many years practice, I know I did, just to feel that feeling. Feel the feeling of being able to direct my attention and then notice and observe how my body would just take a shape. And I was there. And it was almost as if I was completely there and disappeared at the same time. And I think that without sounding, I don't know how to say this without sounding simple, but there's a way in which surrendering to grace is very real, that we somehow, unbeknownst to ourselves and despite ourselves, are really guided in this beautiful way. And having studied and followed a river now for the last several years, you look at the river and how the river, it takes us on this journey, and we may think we need to get to point B straight, but that's the mind doing what it does. And in fact, the way it tends to work is we're given exactly what we need. I don't know how, but all of it is an opportunity. And the quicker we can, and this is another reason I love the practice, the quicker we can integrate whatever it is that we've been given, whatever it is, and open to it and learn from it and explore it. I mean, that to me, that's just living joy right there. And so I would say no question that I feel immensely guided, immensely guided. In fact, I am at my best when I am in the experience of being guided. The more left to my own mind's devices, generally the more trouble there is. Well, I tend to be somebody that enjoys thought very much. And I also have a lot of energy for life. And recently, I'm apprehensive to tell this story, but I'm going to tell this story anyway. Recently, I saw that Ramdas had an opportunity to be on silent retreat at his house, and so I applied, and through a series of steps, I was accepted, and I spent 5 days with him. And it was a remarkable experience because Ramdas had been in my life since 1969, the summer of love, when I first discovered yoga. He really shaped our culture, and he shaped the California culture. And in fact, he was living in the same town as I was several times, and I didn't know it. And he was somebody that you might know began the LSD movement. He was a Harvard psychologist. He, with Timothy Leary, began researching LSD, and he really felt that after quite some time of going deeply into that the power of that might be sustained through going to India, and because it appeared that Indian philosophy had within it the ability to be and not be down here on this earth full of thought. And so he went and through grace discovered this teacher, Neem Karoli Baba, and studied or really became a devotee to this teacher, and then essentially devoted his life to serving people the best he could, and he started several foundations. So he was really, I found out and am finding out so much more about him now. But in my time with him, you know, he said to me, oh, what a mind. Oh, so much energy. Where's this? And so I've been working in my practice on love, on, I have spent enough time in my mind and searching around for the source and study, and I've seen so much potential there. But if I allow myself to feel, and I allow myself to feel where somebody else is, and I can really kind of hold them in that relationship. Where are you? What do you have going on? I can be there for you because I know how to address and be with suffering, because we all, to one extent or another, have suffering in our lives. Then something's going to happen. There's going to be something born out of that exchange that couldn't otherwise. And so I know, you know, they say in the yoga tradition that the heart is the first mind. We should refer to the heart. And I found that because of growing up in California, so new agey for so long, ironically, it seems to work. So we take it down. Yes, we've got this, and there's so much potential, but ultimately we look within the cavern of the heart, and therein lies immense love. And yeah, that's how I know. That's how I know. Well, it would be fair to say that I'm in a deep quandary around service right now and my role serving. Now, I know that when I am happiest and most fulfilled in my life, any opportunity I have to make a situation, you know, it's like make it cleaner than when you came in, right? I do that, or attempt to do that, in all my dealings with the world at large and with people. In terms of service projects, we recently took a group to Malawi, Africa last summer. And we brought LED lights that had been made by a junior high school in Silicon Valley by the kids. They're really good LEDs. And we lit operating rooms where doctors, or interns really, they were doing surgery with their cell phones. And we also had raised some money, but we had to determine where it would be best used. And we realized when we got there that there were people in the community, some of whom were politically involved, that had very strong ideas about where that money would be best used, and that, quite frankly, we didn't know the situation well enough to know where to put the money. And so one morning at about day 4 or 5, we had a conversation where we determined that it would probably be smart to pull out these flip cameras that I have, these little video cameras, and we would have our group, there were about 20 of us, we were all women, we would have our group go back to the health center where the community essentially stays. Like if the girls are pregnant, and they're all pregnant from 15 up, they're going to come to the health center to wait to give birth. So a huge community of people are there, and what we decided we'd do is we would interview them and listen. Instead of get some idea about what the best way to proceed would be, let's listen and see if we can find out from the people on the ground what it's like to be in their shoes. And certainly the Dalai Lama talks about this. This is compassion, right? Being able to sit inside what we imagine it would be like to be someone else, knowing full well that we will never know. And that through that dialogue and that exchange and the relationship building, we would have some better chance of actually seeing something would be born between us, right? So it turned out that we did, through that process, realize indeed what they really needed was an ambulance. They needed an ambulance to get those girls to the hospital because some of them were dying on the way because they were having to walk or the motorcycle that they had was broken down. So that sort of represents where I currently stand around service, because it is an endless sea of suffering out there. And what I've found is that it's essential that we listen to what breaks our own heart, as challenging as that is. And this is why my practices are about developing awareness and spaciousness, so that we can allow for whatever it is to rise and pass, like the river current. It comes, it goes, and here we are, we're able to hold it. When the suffering arises, we don't hold on too tight, we don't push away, we just notice. And then we have to make choices about where is it that we give our resources, our energy, and how best to do it, because we may have very strong ideas. And actually Ramdas talks about this, that many people go into service work because, let's say they came from an alcoholic family and there was injustice, and so they end up in service work devoted to fixing injustice, but what they're doing is they're reawakening that old wound, and they're playing out that old wound. We have to be very intelligent and observant about what are the reasons behind the work that we choose to do. Pay attention to what breaks our heart, and then listen to what's needed, learn, study, research, find out about the culture that you're attempting to make contact with. And answers reveal themselves. This is a beautiful thing. Answers reveal themselves. Well, I think it's important to live with a little heartbreak at all times, quite frankly. And fortunately, I don't have to look very far for heartbreak. I would say that the news of the day, the ongoing story around the inequity between rich and poor, is a constant. I'm constantly reminded of, I live with this question: how is it that we are going to have a political system that is fair? How is it that we could distribute resources in a more equitable way? How is it that we wake people up from what I often interpret as small problems, and it's one reason I like to take people abroad, the small problems of the first world, as my husband and I like to say, to really deep survival issues. I have Africa on my mind a lot, and actually I have a great deal of hope placed in the Gates Foundation. I would like to believe that there's a way out of the mess that we're in. And actually, there's a great quote by Don Quixote, which I won't remember right now, but essentially Martin Luther King said the same thing. See the dream. Whether we get there or not, we don't know, but live the dream. Live it like it's going to happen, and proceed from there. I know folks, and I tend to go there sometimes myself, oh, forget it, look at this, climate change, we're doomed. Well, no. Jury's not out yet. Have a dream and act in accordance with that dream. As far as where I've been most inspired last year, other than being with Ramdas, that was inspiring. But oh my goodness, I went to the Galapagos Islands. I took a group there after Malawi, right? So Malawi was really challenging, and then we went to the Galapagos. And I didn't realize at all that we went off season, and it turns out that means there weren't a lot of tourists, but that the animals themselves just haven't experienced predators. And because of that, they're as curious about me as I am about them. And I got to spend a lot of really close time with animals. And I suppose that, like sea lions and actually pet sharks and stingrays and sea turtles, and I think that really deeply appealed to this childhood notion that if human beings were a whole lot more conscious, that animals and human beings would be living together in harmony. I mean, we sort of heard that. There were biblical references to it as I was growing up. And so I enjoyed so much feeling as though I could respect them, they respected me. We had so much to learn from each other, and it was beings hanging out. And it was beautiful. The modern American human being's main predator is themselves. And I can't begin to explain the nature of mind, or what I often call small mind, but we live inside of a stream that mostly we're unaware of, and that we're all part of, and we've all bought into, mostly without our knowing, and we determine how we feel and what we'll do with our lives and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, all based upon this data stream, for lack of a better term. And we are largely unaware of some forces that play into our lives: the force of anger, the force of aversion, attachment, fear. We're unaware, and in Buddhist terms would be ignorant to these forces that are essentially, they're just tossing us all about. And we, in yoga, we deal a lot with the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system being all flight, fight, freeze. Most of our lives are spent in some relationship with those three principles all of the time, and that the practice, what it does is it gives us an opportunity to see it. And as soon as we get that space, there's a choice to be made. And the more time we spend devoted to observing this stream, the more opening and availability we have for grace, for something else to arise from, and this is where language becomes very, very challenging. But there's another way to live. So I have studied with many, many teachers over the years. Some of them I never met, and many of them closely, personally. I want to acknowledge T.S. Little, who not only showed up in my life at a really important time, but has brought so much to this practice, combining the subtle body and Western anatomy, and Rusty Wells and his bhakti flow experience was, talk about a guy who can bring the heart forward. It was incredible. Kofi Busia, who studied with Iyengar early on, and just such a lovely human being. So many teachers. Mark Singleton has been enormously impactful, both as a scholar and as a mentor in writing my book. Richard Rosen has given so much of his life to this practice, and it's such to me, he just lives this practice in such a humble and beautiful way. Yeah, I think that if I could offer other yoga practitioners advice about proceeding on the path, because I knew early on that I was onto something, but this practice unfolds, and the longer you practice, well, it just keeps unfolding and unfolding. But I think that the key has been for me to really learn to listen internally. I have enjoyed and devoured so many teachings throughout the years, but when I listen to anyone, What I'm listening for is a response internally that, yep, that's right, this is true for me. And what's so incredible is that we all have this teacher that lives inside. The trick with that is that we do really need to have some folks around us that are reliable sources, because that helps expedite our practice. So initially, it's so important. As we begin to develop our capacity to listen internally, then more and more, I mean, everything, every experience in one's life is a teacher. Every person that comes along is a teacher. And any challenge, any obstacle, boy, oh boy, those are teachers right there. No kidding. Sit, well, move body, then sit. That's how I like to do it, at least, because then I've gotten rid of the agitation of whatever my response to the situation is. Sit, ask. Ask with no attachment to when you're going to get the answer. Just ask and stay open. That we're literally living inside this state of inquiry. I don't need to know the answers, but I do need to ask and I need to listen. I listen outside, I listen inside, and guess what? The answers come.